Hello guys, welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we are going to experiment with interesting new concepts and ideas to keep pushing the limits of what high quality speed painting can be even further. And the canvas to test these ideas is the Sluglord's Warband, the first crew of a full lineup of crazy and super stylish factions of an upcoming new skirmish game by Mindwork Games called Paradise, that's already on GameFound, almost ready for the official launch. The guys at Mindwork are definitely more family than friends at this point. And as soon as they showed me the early concept art for their post-apocalyptic waste punk setting months ago, my brain started to race and pile up ideas for different renders, painting styles, and of course their relative practical workflows. My first plan was to pay homage to their vision, fully embracing the pop art style of the original illustrations. But being this only the first warband and basically the icebreaker of this series of videos, I thought to remain a bit more grounded, and still using the art as a strong reference, try to land with a speed painting approach on what I can only describe as a web store / official render kind of style. You know, the professional and, in the limits of the post-apocalypse theme, cleanish type of look you expect from a studio paint job. But again, without betraying our speed painting credo, and keeping the workflow around the 1 hour per model. And don't worry, I'll go for a crazier, full illustrational and almost monochromatic take on the next warband. So stay tuned! A little technical tip before going deep into the color and painting theory. For the wargaming scale, to sell the idea of fine desert sand, snow effects are way better than any sand texture product. And this is true even for these larger 45mm scale figures. These last few months I've traveled a lot, probably too much, for a bunch of workshops and big events. But even when I'm away from the painting table, I like to keep my hands well stretched and trained, sketching and drawing on paper, and playing with colors with a tiny travel kit of watercolors. Long story short, without consciously thinking about it, honestly, I realized the connection only mid-work. I've passively become so used to reason from the starting point of the white page that this workflow is totally coming from that shift of perspective. As always in speed painting, even priming is an obstacle, and an extra time-consuming boring step. So better make it useful, turning it into a functional, deep, foundational tone for the shadows. The illustrations are bathed in purple-violet hues, and I'm going to do the same, to establish from the very beginning that strong undertone, general visual theme, and physical connective tissue for all the next tones and blocks of the scheme. And to create a nice chromatic contrast with this baseline, in my render I'll go up to unhealthy greenish lights that, it's not a case, perfectly match the Joker-style theme of the warband. A tiny thing that you'll see more clearly later, but useful for any translation from 2D art to figures. This sky here is a serious complement, a strong framing device for the color scheme of the characters, and, in simpler terms, volumetrically a huge physical part of its structure, and what makes it work as a whole. So, instead of using these same, more neutral tones for the ground, I'm going to move the warm vibe on the large surfaces of the bases, trying to bring into the structure and maintain similar relations and proportions. The general plan here is to quickly, borderline brutally, climb the value scale with a simple, layered zenithal light, to reach the territory of maximum extreme luminosity for every major tone involved in the scheme. Again, my brain is totally looking for the white page, on which I can then work shades, shadows and volumes with darker values and tones, like you do with pencil and color on paper. But because of the small size of the models and their intricate shapes and details, I don't think that starting from pure white is the easiest option here. Maybe for something larger, more open and geometrically simpler like a Space Marine. But not in this case. And that's why, even aiming to that kind of bleaching luminosity, I invest the time to quickly set the specific local intrinsic tones of the major bits. I don't need any extreme precision in this macro stage, where establishing the highest midtones and extreme lights is the priority. But as default setting, I always try to be as clean and sharp as possible, to train the muscle memory with the airbrush and flex and show off on camera. So to help that aspiration, I layer the tones in the order of physical depth on the model, spraying first the deepest parts, and fixing their inevitable overspray with the new, more external layers. You'll get a bit of overspray anyway, that's an integral part of the airbrush as a tool, but with the underlying idea that we need to learn how to use its inevitable presence more than fight it. I integrate that bit of contamination as the extra tonal variations and nuances that naturally occur when you put two objects next to each other. And chasing the extreme values, of course I have to land on pure, all-encompassing white, as last step of this climb and final peak of my light. This is what we are looking for to make the plan work. Of course, I'm not completely mad. And for the smallest elements, like straps and small bits of leather, I'm using a very transparent layer of contrast paint to establish their local tone. Water is the main transparency agent to obtain a more gentle, semi-transparent coverage, and a good quantity of matte medium is there to fix and thicken the low watery density, making the brushstrokes more consistent, precise and stable when spread on these tiny shapes. The transparency keeps the values intact, but the high saturation of contrast paints often swallows the tones of a chromatic underpainting a tiny bit too much. That's why I tend to use them only for small bits like this, or over a pure grisaille, where chromatically you don't have anything to lose. Oil washes are a staple of my speed painting flows, and even if the macro stage tends to look similar in every paint job, in reality every single time I'm doing something a little different, depending on the needs of the sculpts and the visual style I'm trying to render. In this case, I plan to use oils to quickly and quite aggressively give me all the lowest and midway midtones that I basically ignored in the previous stage. Now, more and more technically than philosophically, I'm acting like when sketching on paper, you move from super light and gentle gestural pencil marks to sharper, more defined and darker opaque lines that really start to define your drawing and its volumes. In this case, with also the extra impact of tones on top of the value information. The selection of colors here is quite intuitive. Blue tones for the blue parts, violet and purple for the violet and purple bits. Nothing more than that. These subtleties are all in the nature of the paints and the timing of their applications. Except for Ruby Red. That's actually a classic, simple, translucent and quite gentle quinacridone magenta. All the other tones are opaque, and all in the range of medium to high staining power. This means that the opaque tones will naturally stick to the light surfaces with more intensity and saturation, and I'm enhancing this behavior even more, timing the applications in an order that goes from maximum impact on the blue parts, aka my first application, to the gentle, minimal impact of magenta and yellowish green on the skins, aka my last application. To put it simply, the more they stay on, the more they will be visible. As soon as all the tones are in place and the bulk of the highly volatile white spirit has evaporated, we are talking about 5 to 10 minutes before the last brushstroke, I quickly clean the models with Q-tips and small makeup sponges, with vertical from top to bottom passes that mimic and follow the vertical movement of the zenithal light established from the beginning. And I obtain this. A canvas made of super rich mid-values, full of organic, interesting shades and tones, with a well-defined shading and a fine dark definition on which, after a night of rest to let the micro quantity of oil left behind set firmly, I can finally add all the tiny, sharper details and the definitive cleanup, but this time with a twist. As you can see, the acrylic palette follows a very similar, super intuitive logic for the different colors of the scheme, but this time with the whole value scale moved to the light side of the spectrum. This is where the analogy with working on paper falls a bit apart. Drawing, you mostly keep pushing on the dark values with minimal, mostly subtractive interventions on the light parts. But what remains constant and still valid is the focus on cleaning and sharpening the sketch, with the introduction of a bunch of interesting tiny details and textures. There's always room for improvement, and of course, I'll keep coming up with different ideas to make every stage more technically efficient. But for the moment, I think I've optimized the first stages to their peak. And I strongly believe that nothing can bring you to this point of the process, and with this specific richness and complexity of cool visual information this quickly and efficiently. But there's still a bunch of exploration and discoveries to be made for this point onwards. This is usually my third and final stage, the one on which I pack on average 2/3, and often more, of the total workflow. Mostly because I selfishly enjoy a lot noodling details and light definition with the brush. But reasoning in the dry perspective of pure efficiency, I was wondering, what corner can I still cut here? Stay with me because this is a bit subtle and advanced. So here is my idea. I can cut on the fine value and tonal modulation of the details, and find a way to bring it back later. Sure, because of all the previous setup, what I have to focus on now is just the upper part of the value scale, with just a minimal border crossing into the high midtones. But there's still quite a lot of micro work to do on the palette, for all those hundreds of tiny color matching mixes, and super small adjustments that pile up both in time and mental energy cost. You know, if you're going for high quality, even a simple edge highlight is very different and internally modulated. If you compare an extreme edge light on top of a helmet and one on a boot, way much farther from the light. So, what if I go brute force on the application of textures and details, skipping that modulation and basically staying just on a flat extreme light, and then I adjust them to the surface in a single general final swoop? In a way, this attitude is similar to the sketch and refine by layering that has been popularized by the Spanish painters, and that ends with a smoothing glazing pass with the airbrush. But in this case, smoothness is not a huge concern, because I don't have layers to connect and hide. I actually had them, but they hid themselves in the gentle, borderless overlap of airbrush and oils. So I can focus on tones, and in a minor way on values, using super transparent and highly chromatic colors to reinstate and enhance on the details the general flow of lights and shadows. So I simply retrace my steps along the color wheel. First, progressively going down into the warm sensations of the shadows. This is actually closer to what in oil painting is glazing. And closing the flow with a pinch of unhealthy and contrasting green from the top. Now, every brushstroke has been touched by this gentle reinforcing of the general flow, and every bit is expressing a tone and value perfect for its relative position on the model. And this is the final result. And this is my official apology for a workflow that probably indulged too much on intricate technical lucubrations. I had too much time to think about painting in a vacuum, without being able to act on it. And this is the inevitable result. A bunch of convoluted ideas and the urge to test them all at the same time. These videos are an ever-growing open conversation with you guys, and the natural progression of my painting, so I'm not always able to re-explain the basics of every theoretical beat I'm experimenting on. But be sure that if I'm skipping something, it's because I've talked about it in detail in a previous video. So if you are new to the channel, dig into the archive, because there's a bunch of good stuff in there. See you in the next one with a new warband. And follow the project on GameFound. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials, or watch me painting live on Twitch. Check the schedule of the streams on the Twitch homepage. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!